I want to welcome everyone for what I hope will be a marvelous conversation with Rabbi Art Green. I thought that it would be appropriate before we begin and before I actually introduce Art, that we take a moment in silence to just think about what's going on in the Ukraine and also what we could do, more than just thinking about what's going on. There are steps that we can take, contributions we can make. I would suggest that you consider the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. They're on the ground working with people. So think about what you've done, what you can do. Are there political things that can be done? And just a moment of silence, I think, would be appropriate. All right, thank you, everyone. I want to introduce my Rebbe, my teacher, my friend, Rabbi Art Green, who I think, beyond a doubt, is most probably the most important Jewish religious thinker today, and we're really grateful that he's joined us. And I wanted to introduce him by telling you a story about a very impactful encounter many years ago. When I first started working for Hillel, I was invited to teach at Camp Starlight, the B'nai B'rith camp, where there was a student assembly, summer institute. And none other than Art Green was a scholar in residence. And our good friend and teacher, Max Tickton, announced to a few of us that every morning, I forget what, I think it was 7:30 in the morning, I'm not sure, we could meet with Art to study together. And I think there were 5 or 6 of us who joined. Eddie Feld was there, Max, maybe Litovsky, Alan was with us, and Danny Leifer, I think, as well. And you were working at that time on Your Word is Fire, if I'm not mistaken, and with Barry Holtz. And you taught us some sections from the Baal Shem Tov ala Tfilah, the Baal Shem Tov's writing that are gathered on prayer, that are organized together on his teachings on prayer. And I went up to you afterwards and I said, I was actually dumbfounded. I didn't know what to say. This is the first time in my life. I've gone to yeshiva all my life. I'm an ordained rabbi. I've studied with some very master teachers. And this is the first time in my life that I learned text and was engaged in discussing God and prayer in a serious way. Of course, I knew about prayer. I knew about God. We were davening all the time in elementary school. We knew the prayers by heart already when I was a kid. But we davened, you know, like my high school teacher used to say to us when it was mincha time, okay, boys, time to daven up. So we davened up. and Art Green introduced me to a very different experience of what it meant to pray. And I think it must probably, and I said, what do I do? I want to continue. Of course, the irony was I had grown up in a household that was had descended from Hasidim. My grandfather, Ariel Shalom, was a Hasid. And that was something that was transmitted to me. And I knew nothing about Hasidut. That was it. I had a great Jewish education, except something was absent. And nothing about Hasidut, certainly nothing about Kabbalah. So, and I think it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that very few of the teachers in my day talked about prayer as a serious, the religious teachers in rabbinical schools in those days talked about the prayer, a meaningful prayer experience. The consequence is that I've always said that I think that Jews, certainly in America, are the least religious group in America. And that to me was always very troubling. And Art Green has taken on the task, it seems to me, of sort of reintroducing us to the inner world that has enriched his life. And we owe him a great debt of gratitude. So I just want to say just another word. He's written numbers of books. You might be familiar with some of them. I'll mention some titles. Of course, Your Word is Fire. I found my copy. It's an old copy. I think it's the first edition, right? Paulus Press, right?
That was $2.95. It's now $6.95, I think.
Okay, all right. Okay. And more recently, Radical Judaism, Judaism's 10 Best Ideas. His dissertation, published as Tormented Master, itself a masterful work, an important work. He edited with his student and colleague 2 volumes recently, just the last couple of years, called New Hasidism, 1 volume Roots and 1 volume Branches. His magnum opus, translation, a life work, the translation of the teachings of Rabbi Nahum of Chernobyl. Chernobyl is in the news these days. This is a different type of Chernobyl. And as you see, the title of Nahum's work was Ma'or Einayim, the light of the eyes. It's a different type of light that emanated from the teachings of Nahum. And the book that I'd like to sort of focus on today, which is Judaism and the World. Judaism and the World. It's a beautiful book, art, poetic, evocative, and you open yourself up. I mean, we have a sense of your own sort of vulnerability. You invite us in, and you present yourself as a man, as a loving man with an open heart. So I want to start, I'm sorry for talking so long, I want to start with a quote, and then we'll get into our conversation. You say the following, and this is a troubling passage, but it'll get us right in. Art writes, Lord of the universe, I do not believe in you. You are our all God, good maker and master. You who watch and listen, know everything and act for goodness always. You who, quote, support the fallen, heal the sick, release the bound, and keep faith with those who lie in the dust, end quote. I do not believe in you. I have seen and tasted too much dust. I read the daily headlines, war, destruction, typhoon, tsunami, earthquake. I have dared to love and watched my loved ones die. Those fool enough to love me will soon watch me die as well. Why? Why should I believe? Kohelet said it all. In a world filled with both human evil and nature's indifference to us, how am I supposed to believe in you? But to whom can I bring the pain of my disbelief, if not to you? To whom can I cry out, if not to you, the all foundation, on whom my house is built, rock upon whom I stand, sea into whose oblivion I will fall when oblivion becomes my fate? Am I too weak to live without you, without a someone into whose ear to scream, so that I have to invent you, O terrible plaything of my imagination? There are days when it feels like that. Or am I indeed, as I think on better days, wise enough to have seen beyond the horizons of my daily mind, deep enough to see the truth of truths, the far shores of the chasm of great emptiness, to recover a truth beyond reality, beyond words? That truth knows of something I can barely address as you, but surely cannot call it. Then I dare to open myself and turn to you, the hope and dream of that place across the chasm that is none other than the hole in my broken heart. That gives me life, that allows me to go forward day after day. I do not believe in you, but my life is saved because I do not believe in believing either. So, Art Green, tell us, you do not believe in you. So who is God? Who is God after Auschwitz? What is religion and what is Judaism? A small question. Why don't you start us off, please?
Oh, you've really jumped right in. Let me jump back a couple of places. and just say, your compliments about my role in this generation are very nice, but remember what Shalom Aleichem said, "B'mokom she'ein ish is a herring a fish." The place where there is no man, a herring is also a fish. So I thank you for the compliment. And now let me try to say something about the way I understand theology. Theology is a purely personal business. Theology is taking the language of religious tradition and using it as a key to explain and understand my own experience in life. So it can't possibly be anything but personal. Abstract theology is empty for me. Systematic theology is quite empty for me. Theology is a religious accounting of the life I have lived, and its core lies in religious experience. Without experience, theology is just empty talk, and that experience lies rooted in prayer. So this passage you read is from the chapter on prayer. I think a section called "How I Pray." Well, what I mean by prayer,
Right?
because prayer is a primary religious activity. Theology is a secondary when you reflect on what happened to you during prayer or what didn't happen to you during prayer. But prayer comes before theology, underlies theology. I always tell my students that I've been teaching both rabbinical students and college and graduate students for a long time now. I'm about to end that part of my life, of those many years of teaching, but I've told them for such a long time, it's not only about prayer, is not only about the text, it's not only about the Siddur. What is the act of praying? What do we mean by praying? What are we doing when we pray? Get to that before you get to, can I say this word? Can I skip that word? Do I say it this way or that way? What's the proper tune to sing in Shabbos Mincha? Never mind all that. What is this business called praying? What's it all about? So now getting to the passage you read. Yes, that's you. You really picked a tough passage. I'm a religious person, Chaim. I'm a religious person because of my questions, not because of the answers I have. I have more questions. I've always had more questions than answers. I'm going to be 81 years old this month, and I still think of myself as a seeker because I'm asking religious questions. When I was 20 years old, I had already been through an Orthodox phase and out of it. I tried on religious orthodoxy or intense observance period when I was an adolescent and was too young for it, was too neurotic for it. I went through a very secular phase. I don't believe in any of this. And then I came back and said, no, I'm still a religious person because my questions are, what am I doing here on this planet? Why am I alive? And why am I going to die? And what am I supposed to do between those 2 moments and death? And how can it become meaningful? And what does this have to do with a life of service? And those were all religious questions, and those are still my religious questions. And I ask them in the context of Judaism, because it's the tradition of my ancestors, and I've come to love it over many years and live in many years. So it's the questions that challenge me. Now, I'm a 21st century Jew. And that makes a very big difference. I don't live in the 12th century like the Rambam, or the 13th century like Zohar, or the 18th century like the Baal Shem Tov. I live in the 21st century. The two great battles that religion fought in the 20th century against the modern world, the battle against evolution, the battle against science, we called it Darwin, but it's really against the astrophysics and geology and everything else, the age of the earth, that battle, and the battle against biblical criticism and history of religion, those two battles were decisively lost by the forces of religion. They're over. So where do we go after that? We also have, as you say, the Holocaust immediate past. When I was growing up, Jews were so secular partly because of the Holocaust. As soon as you said anything about God, the question was, so where was God in 1944? End of conversation. I think we are beginning to heal from that horrible, horrible wound. And the rediscovery of spirituality, the rediscovery of the possibility of talking about God is related to that healing process. And we are still, the body politic of the Jewish people is still terribly wounded by what happened in the 20th century. But I think we have to allow for some of that healing to happen. And I see my work as part of that process.
So tell us, who is this God in whom you don't believe? I mean, no, how do we talk? Because all your prayers are addressed to God. Does God listen? Does God hear? What role does God play in your life as God?
So when I was writing that book with Barry Holtz, Your Word is Fire, and looking back at all the Hasidic texts on prayer that Heschel had taught, and trying to expand beyond, my very favorite one was a one-liner from Reb Pinchas of Koretz, who was a contemporary of the Baal Shem Tov. Reb Pinchas said, I'll say it in Hebrew, those who understand, and I'll translate it. Ha'olam sfurin shemipalin lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu ve'eno ken. Ela hatfilah hi etzem Elohut mamash. People think you pray to God, and that is not the case. Rather, prayer itself is of the divine essence. The act of praying is an act that has God in it. Once more, the act of praying is an act that has God in it. God is in you as you open your heart to pray. That's a sacred act. Like bringing a korban, a sacrifice, was a sacred act. Opening your mouth to pray, opening your heart to pray is a sacred act. It's not as though you are standing here and God is over there listening, because I don't know where over there is. I don't know a place on the other side of the sky where there's a heaven and a throne and an old fellow sitting there. No, that's gone for me. That left me when I was a kid. The atheism most Jews talk about is because they outgrew their childish notion of God and nobody ever gave them anything to take its place. Sometimes I talk about my religion as a seeker-friendly Judaism, but sometimes I just talk about it as Judaism for adults, a Jewish theology for adults. Well, yes, we outgrew with 13 or 15 or 18, or when a parent died or when a cat died, we outgrew believing that God rewards the good children and punishes the bad children. And then many of us decided we were atheists because that childish notion of God didn't work anymore. And we weren't given anything else. So I'm looking for a different notion. I really don't believe in an old fellow in the sky. I believe all our images of God, are human projections. God as Father, God as King, all of them are human projections. We need them. God doesn't need them. The one doesn't need them. The word G-O-D is not a word I like very much. The word Yud-He-Vav-He is a word I love deeply. The word Yud-He-Vav-He, remember, is impossible conflation of the verb to be. It's Hayah, Hoveh, Yehyeh, all shushed together in a form that doesn't exist. It should not be translated God, it should be translated is, was, will be. Because it's is, was, will be all at once. That's what it is. It is being itself. It is the dynamic form of being itself. That's what I understand God to be. I understand God to be the totality of being, all seen from the point of view of unity, the oneness of being that underlies every creature and is within us all and beyond us all. As the Zohar says, Sovev kol almin mumalek kol almin. It surrounds all the worlds and it fills all the worlds. In order to relate to it, we need to personify it. I don't think that's a sin. I think it's all right to personify, but we should know that we're doing that. We understand that it's very hard to be intimate, to open your heart, to cry to the oneness of the universe. And therefore, to make it, to humanize it, is not lying to ourselves. Somewhere in a corner of our mind, we should understand that we're doing that, but then be generous enough to allow ourselves the freedom to do so. That's how I understand the relationship between this rather abstract theology of mine and the Siddur. The Siddur is a way of allowing ourselves to personify it so that we can open our hearts to the one.
So I know that some people might ask you, if God is the totality of being, do we need God? In other words, that notion, the totality of being, or the idea of oneness, I think that speaks to a lot of people. That could they aspire to oneness without that sense of God? What would be missing in their lives if they didn't have that religious dimension to their pursuit or to their lives?
Well, let's go the route of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
In meditation, you can open yourself to that oneness. You can feel the presence of that oneness. You can let all things pass by you, and so you can enter into that one. But to take your emotional self along with you, I think you need a personification. At least I do. I can't say you do. I can't say everyone does. I say I find the personification useful
Mm-hmm.
in order to take my emotional self along with that abstract oneness meditation. So I've had dialogue with Buddhist friends, with Jubu friends. My very dear sister who passed away this month was a Jubu, and we had many conversations about it. And the letting things go, the letting all things go, to go into the abstraction, which is what she was taught, and going deep into the emotional life, I, as a neo-Breslever, you might say, was taught. As I learned from Rabbi Nahum, you have to go into all the pain of your life, not run away from it, not transcend it. Take it along with you. Take the words with you. Take the reality with you when you return to the one. So I have come to feel that personification is useful. Not always easy, but helpful.
And I think the other thing that you achieve is when you talk about personification as useful, is there's a dimension of relationship that is suggested here, because in other words, it's not merely some abstract idea, and that relationship can spill over beyond just God itself or God's self.
I want to say God is not an idea for me. It's a reality. The one is a reality, and opening oneself to oneness is a reality. It's instinctive to me, Chaim. I think there is, and this will you'll probably get to the question of observance and mitzvot and something like that somewhere in this conversation, but I understand it this way. There is a tree, and a tree does not have a human consciousness that says to us, you must spread forth roots to find water and must raise your branches high to catch sunlight, but the tree knows to do it. The tree just does it. Now we're learning maybe trees in the forest help each other do it.
Mm-hmm.
Animals know they have to eat and know they have to reproduce before they die, eat and reproduce, eat and reproduce. That's called instinct. They have this instinct in them. I think when the human brain reached a certain level of development, we began to develop an instinctive voice that said somehow inside us in the same way, figure it out. It's the voice, it's the first that God says to a human being in Bereshit, in Genesis, Ayeka, where are you? I think that inner voice that says, where are you? And you can also turn it around and say that voice says, Anochi, I am, is the essence of revelation. It reveals itself to us from within. We somehow know within there is something more there. Whether it's the oneness of being, whether you need to call it G-O-D or not, and then we respond to that voice. We create religion in response to that voice. That voice says, be aware, figure it out. What are you doing here? What's your life about? Why are you alive? And find meaning. Go seek meaning. I think seeking is innate somehow. Most of us run away from it most of the time, but I think there's something innate in us that says, figure out what you're doing here. And then all the rest is response to that. All the rest is our answer to that call.
Now, it's in your formulation of the oneness of being, God is the totality. So that means that from God's perspective, there's nothing else but God. Is the world itself an illusion if God is the only reality? Or maybe the assertion of God is the illusion. I mean, when we say there's something beyond, I don't know. I don't know anything beyond. I'm one of those who says, what are you talking about that there's something beyond? So on both sides, is the world real? Is God real?
Why, one of my students, when I went to speak in his congregation, made a very nice poster. And the poster said, "Is there only one God, or is there only one?" And that's, Dr. Green is about to speak. And yes, remember the Tanya, the basic book of Chabad Hasidism, translates the verse from Deuteronomy that we all know from the Aleinu. Know this day and set it upon your heart that the God is the earth beneath. Ein od, there ain't nothing else. Ein od, there ain't nothing else. And that means from a certain divine point of view, that's the only reality. From the point of view of our limited minds, our limited post-Kantian minds, if you will, we live inside human consciousness. We can only see things from our point of view, but I think we are given a glimpse of something beyond. I think human consciousness is constructed in such a way that if we stretch our minds as fully as we can, we are able to achieve a glimpse of something transcendent, of something beyond. Transcendent, I don't mean somebody living over there on the other side of the sky. That's not what I mean by transcendence. For me, transcendence lives inside immanence. The one is so fully present in this moment that we can never penetrate the depths of that essence. That's the transcendent inside the immanent, not the transcendent out there and the immanent in here.
So give us some guidance. How do we realize that oneness in our lives? How do we sense the divinity of all of being? How do we make it real for ourselves? What does Judaism say is the route to achieving, to realizing that experience?
Understand that there is something deeper. There is something deeper in the way you see the self, in the way you see the world, and in the way you see the text. Behind the levushim, behind the garments of the person, behind the body of the person, there lies a soul, there lies an inner self. And to really know a person is to open yourself to that inner self. And that's a love relationship, or that's a deep friendship, or that's a bond that you have to open your heart to. But there is a deeper self to a person than that which you see in an I-it transactional relationship. Yes, I tell people in every encounter, this is a rabbi, in every encounter you try to see a human being. I said on this week's parsha, the book of Vayikra, which is all about priests and priestly things, begins with Adam ki yakriv, a person who wants to offer. Because if you're a priest, you have to see the person coming to you with his animal to sacrifice as a whole person. Maybe he's really Adam ki yakarev, he wants to come close. And don't just be a functionary and take his carbon and say, check off, yes, you get two carbon credits, go to the back of the line, but rather meet him as a person. So there's something deeper in the person, and there's something deeper in the world. And that means to say, you come to see the chiyut, you come to see the flow of life or the flow of existence that exists in all things. I'm a nature lover. I'm a New Englander, and so I love the mountains of northern New England and the coast of Maine, and though there's some holy places there for me. And I'm now have the great privilege of living in Yerushalayim for these months, and I go walking on the Tayelet and see that magnificent view of the holy city and the hills around it, and those views inspire me to see more in the world than just the outer view. Yes, I see the pain of the poor Arab villages across the line. We're not even talking about that, but I also see the splendor of it, the magnificence of it. Heschel taught us to open our hearts to wonder, that wonder was what the essence of being a religious person is, cultivating the sense of wonder. And I think that's a big part of what it means to be a religious person with regard to the world, cultivating a sense of wonder. Skip my books and read the first 100 pages of Heschel's God in Search of Man, where he talks about awe and mystery and wonder. That's great religious writing. Mm-hmm. And in the text also, yes, we always know the text. We preserve the text. We love the text, but we never take it just literally. We always go deeper and deeper and uncover new levels. And one of the reasons I love the Kabbalists is I understand that they weren't satisfied with the surface of the text. And I'm not satisfied either. They might have been dissatisfied for different reasons. We have different questions, but the idea that you can penetrate the text and go deeper and there's something deeper truth in the text. You can open it up. Rabbi Shimon Patach, he opened up the text. You open up the text and see something deeper in it. So it's the turn toward that deeper vision. By the way, I'm a person, one of the things I said when I first started writing theology, we live with too unthinking a commitment to the vertical metaphor. The vertical metaphor, where is God? Upstairs, and we are down here. Hashamayim, shamayim ladonai, va'aretz natan livnei adam. We didn't invent that. We inherited that from the pagan cultures around us. Yes, the gods lived in the sky, around the top of the mountains. So the idea that up and down, I prefer the in and out metaphor. When the Torah said, when Moses, before he dies, says, Lo b'shamayim hi, ki im beficha u'levavecha la'asoto. It's not in heaven. The teaching isn't in heaven. It's in your mouth and your heart. The journey is a journey inward. And if we talk about an inward journey to God instead of an upward journey to God, we've already changed the picture completely, because then you're talking about deeper levels of consciousness. Then you're talking something the Jungian can understand, where you go from the individual consciousness and discover the archetypes of the collective unconscious. It's something the psychedelic voyager can also understand, because you go from level to level of inner human experience. And God is to be found, the one is to be found in an inward journey rather than an upward journey. And I think that's an important step in this Judaism for adults, in this theology for adults, to think inward rather than thinking upward.
And do mitzvot aid us in this search, in our attempt to go inward? Most of us, have been taught to perform acts, not to internalize the experience. So teach us a little bit. What could it mean?
Well, a mitzvah is a good thing to do. I remember Heschel always saying in Yiddish, the word mitzvah is extended. It doesn't just mean a commandment. It means a good deed. And he would say, tu mir a mitzvah, bring me a glass Wasser. Do a mitzvah for me, bring me a glass of water. It doesn't mean that it's a commandment in the Torah to bring you a glass of water, but tu mir a mitzvah, do something good for me. So I think that's the first thing to say. In the Hasidic sources, the word mitzvah has two derivations, beyond, of course, from the word to command in the Bible. Mitzvah has two derivations. One is from an Aramaic root that means togetherness, tzavta, mitzvah milashon tzavta. A mitzvah is something that brings you God together. You and God both are participants in the same act. There's some divine presence in that act in a mysterious way, and you enter into it and are together. And they also say in Hasidut that the mitzvah is God half present and half hidden. Because the Vav Hey, the last two letters of mitzvah, are the same as the letters of God's name. The first two letters, Mem Tzadi, are in a backwards alphabet, in what's called an Atbash alphabet, Yud and Hey. So the mitzvah, God is half hidden and half revealed. And to me, a mitzvah, I have a sort of neo-Kabbalistic view of the mitzvah, that there's something like sacraments. They're mysterious acts we can never quite fathom. And they have a power to address us on a deep inner level. We may not know that they're healing us on a deep inner level. We may not feel it, but there is something very powerful about the antiquity of these acts and the simplicity of them, whether it's waving a palm branch in 6 different directions, or it's eating a particular kind of crackers in a particular week during the spring, or it's living in a hut for a week at the fall full moon. Those to me are very powerful acts, and I'm willing to open myself to their containing some mystery. I don't believe there's a fellow in the sky who commanded us to do them and who was watching whether we do them or not. I'm far from that. I want to make that clear. I believe all these ceremonial acts were created by those who created our religion, and it evolved over the centuries. I think that's all a response to that divine voice that calls out, hey, what are you doing here? Figure it out. We respond by the forms of religion. So there is a divine call behind them. There's not a divine call that says, tie those straps on your arm, don't eat that cheeseburger. But there is a divine call that says, figure it out, do something in response, find a way to remind yourself about the oneness of the world. If you're going to forget, you're so busy chasing your livelihood, you're so busy catching up with what's on your computer screen, you're going to forget. So find regular ways to remind yourself. Now, whether that way is bowing down in the mosque 5 times a day or tying straps on your arms and forehead, I don't think makes an ultimate difference. Don't think that makes an ultimate difference. But we are leman tizkeru. We are to do the mitzvot so as reminders. And that to me is what it's all about. We have created, the religions of the world have created great and profound reminder systems.
So let me go for a moment. Let me go back to prayer for a second, because you talk now about reminders, and I think about prayer as helping to raise our consciousness. So how can we do that without words? Are the words sometimes obstacles to our pursuit? Is silence a value? I mean, something that I think Jews find very difficult. But why is it absent from our attempts, our spiritual efforts?
It's a terrible loss. We have medieval Jewish chapters and treatises on ma'alat hashtika, on the value of silence. It's there, but we lost it. I think the way our tradition was built, Chaim, we added and added and added, and crowded out these spaces, crowded out the silence. I love the city of Jerusalem that I'm living in, but I'm watching how the builders are coming along and putting an apartment house in every single empty lot. And soon there's no more empty space. And I think we built our siddur that way. You know what I mean? Maybe it's a Jewish tendency to live in crowded places and have crowded prayer books. I think our Yom Kippur is all wrong. There's so many words, there's no room for silence. Where's the room for cheshbon nefesh on Yom Kippur? And where's the joy of Yom Kippur, of celebrating that we are forgiven? We're so busy klapping al chetz, we're so busy saying how many times we've sinned over and over and over again, silently and aloud and silently. I think we waste much of the day by too much verbiage. So I'm pretty critical of some of this. But I think the recovery of silence is one of the great gifts that the East-West meeting of this century is giving us. That there are rabbis who do meditation for half an hour before Shacharit on Shabbat morning with congregants who want to come, I think is fabulous. I think a rabbi has to be smart enough to learn, if you have 2 minutes of silence before Tkiyat Shofar and Rosh Hashanah, you're going to have a whole different experience of Tkiyat Shofar. the moment before you start Hallel, the moment before you start Hallel with the lulav and esrog on Sukkot, or the moment before that first hodu, that first shekel, is a moment for silence. There are to reinstill silence into our liturgy will make our liturgy much stronger. A silence before a Baruch Hu, instead of reading from Chatzi Kaddish into Baruch Hu. Take a deep breath. I think those are going to be enriching things, and we are learning them partly from our East-West encounter, and I think that's okay. When we meet other traditions, I think we have things to give and things to learn, and I don't mind learning. I'm not talking about observances from other traditions, so of course not. But learning insights, I think that's fine.
I think also about allowing oneself to close one's eyes. You talked about breathing. Breathing is really important. I remember Zalman taught us that in the morning we say Eloheinu Neshama Shenatata Bi, God, the soul that you gave me. That's a breathing exercise. Ata Yetzarta, Ata Nefachta. I mean, it changed my whole prayer experience when I heard that. That's what I think is missing. You have a language, Art. You've made a translation. We need that translation, and is it available? Is it available? I mean, people want that.
I am a translator. That's what I do with my life. If you have to define what my profession has been, I'm a translator, not only from Hebrew into English, and sometimes from English into Hebrew, because I'm translating my own Divrei Torah into Hebrew.
Right.
But I'm also a translator from the 18th century into the 21st century. And that's a very different kind of translation. Now, I will go a step further for you. The name of God, Yud He Vav He, you cannot pronounce. We're not allowed to pronounce it. It's too mysterious. But we can breathe it. Because those four letters are all breaths, especially if the Vav was a wow, which was originally ya, ha, wa, and ha, are all breaths. So to use the name as a breathing exercise is to breathe in the Yud, and then out the, and then the, and just to use that as a meditation. The name of God is a breath meditation, and I think that's a great way to pray. And I like the siddur. I learned the siddur in my grandfather's shul when I was a little kid. It was a little corner of Eastern Europe transplanted to northern New Jersey. Grandpa and I used to sit there and laugh at Mr. Leimitz, who sat next to him, because Mr. Leimitz said Ein Kalahaini instead of Ein Kalahainu. And we thought it was funny. And I grew up in that world of sort of, knowing that stuff from childhood and loving it from childhood. But for people coming in from the outside, I don't want them to say every word, to rush and get lost and try to say every word. I think that's a mistake. Take a few words, take a phrase, take Nishmat Kol Chai, and say it for 5 minutes. Or Yachid Chai HaOlamim, or one of those universal phrases. V'varech Kol Basar Shem Kodshecha, may flesh bless your name. Say that over and over again for a little while. That's okay. Nobody's counting the number of words you got through. But people get intimidated by that. Those people who know the whole thing by heart. I remember that experience as a kid, seeing all these old guys who knew it all by heart. My grandfather, who knew it all by heart, did not understand a word of what he was saying. He was a real old-fashioned Ametz. He was a real old-fashioned simple Jew who knew how to do it, but didn't know what it meant. And I would rather people have a phrase where they know what it means and take 5 minutes saying it with their eyes closed. I think that's a very legitimate form of Jewish prayer.
Now in your book, you and in your talks, you've said often that all that is left for us is love.
I want to go for a minute. I want to go back for a minute and say what I just said. And this is your language more than it's my language, but I want to halachically too. The Rambam said very clearly that prayer is a mitzvah d'oraisa. Prayer is a biblical commandment. But saying the words of the prayer is a rabbinic ordinance. The rabbis did us a favor and gave us words with which to pray. That doesn't mean that prayer is only the saying of those words. To pray is a more important mitzvah than to daven. Let's put it that way. I think the Rambam affirms that very clearly. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's great. And to the Rambam, it seems to me that meditation would be the highest form of prayer. Actually, in the Modes, in the guide, he certainly says that. And it's intimated in his halachic presentation that words were introduced as a concession in a way, and language, and a fixed language especially. But I do want to move on to this question, because you claim that Judaism is a religion of love. It's all about love. I think that to many of us that's a new idea. What do you mean Judaism is a religion of love? Judaism is a religion of law, of rules. I mean, the whole description, you got to do this. You're trying to move us to another religion. What do you mean?
Yes, I'm trying to sneak a love in the back door. Yeah. Right. When Rabbi Akiva said, what's the most basic rule of the Torah? Love your neighbor as yourself. Or when Hillel said, to teach the whole Torah while you stand on one foot, don't do to your neighbor what's hateful to you. In between Hillel and Akiva, there was another rabbi who said the whole Torah is about love God with all your heart, soul, and might, and love your neighbor as yourselves. You know, he had a pretty successful thing going there. It's called Christianity, of course, and they ran away with love. And so for Jews, if you say God loves you, ooh, that sounds goyish, that sounds Christian. You know, the Christians say God is love. We don't say God is just love. We say God is ahava v'yira, love and awe together. It's very important to me. We have love and awe and love. And we stand and tremble in the awe, and we at the same time open our hearts to love. The paradigmatic experience of Sinai, of Judaism, is Sinai. And at Sinai, the mountain was aflame and people were trembling. And at the same time, Rabbi Akiva says, Shira Shirim b'Sinai ne'emra. At the same time this was happening, God was whispering the Song of Songs into his beloved's ear. So they go to their love and awe. Listen, why remain actively Jewish? What's going to convince this next generation to do it? There is nobody in the sky who's going to punish them. There is no fear of you're not going to have eternal life, you're going to go to hell because of the mitzvot. That's over, and I'm glad that's mostly over. I'm glad that's mostly over for Jews. I don't think that's a healthy kind of religion. I think religion has to be about spiritual growth, not about intimidation, not about terror. So I'm glad that kind of religion is gone. We're also now a generation beyond, you have to do it because of the Holocaust. So many Jews died, you have to be observant. That might have worked in the 1950s and 1960s when you and I were growing up, but that's gone now too. I think all we have is love. Why am I teaching this tradition? Why am I training you to be a rabbi? Why am I writing books about this tradition? Because I love it. Because I love it. Because I love it, and it's my way of expressing my love of God, which is also my love of life, and my love of people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we have got to share. Now, people say, yes, but that's not enough, because will that keep people observant? Well, that's all we've got. I don't think I have an answer to that. I don't think I have an answer to that. I cannot say you must do it. I cannot say you must do it. I can say I do it because I love it and I want to share that with you. And I think, well, I know you well enough, Chaim. We know each other enough years that you're probably in a place not far away from that. And I think that we have to give. So sharing that love, sharing the love of the tradition, love of the Jewish people, and the love of God. That's what the Baal Shem Tov said. I came into this world for three loves: Ahavat Hashem, Ahavat Torah, Ahavat Yisrael. The love of God, the love of Torah, and the love of the Jewish people. I would say the love of humanity, but also of the Jewish way. That's what we're here for. We're here to be givers. The Rav Ashlag, the great Kabbalist of the early 20th century, said that the world is divided between mashpim and mekablim, between givers and receivers. We are all receivers. By the fact that we are alive, we are receiving so many gifts every day. The gift of life itself, the gift of love, the gift of family, the gift of intellect, so many things. And we have to we turn ourselves around from being just receivers to being givers. To become a giver is to become a lover. You give out of love. The word Hasid comes from the word Chesed, which means compassionate, loving, and loving without expecting reward. I think that's like love is about training us to be givers, and givers without an immediate sense of you got to give me back.
And of course, the word mitzvah, which is the quintessential commanding word, has as its root from the Zoharic or Hasidic perspective, tzavta, togetherness, relationship. So perhaps the mitzvot themselves can be a means for binding ourselves to one another. Certainly, I mean, and that, but all of that requires consciousness and intention. I mean, something that needs to be cultivated. You know, and in a life that we live in, a modern life, it seems to me that we're not the only ones who are lacking in that capacity. It seems to be something missing from the culture in general. Do you have any suggestions for people who want to enter the tradition? What can they do to begin to cultivate that dimension for themselves and nourish themselves in this way?
I would say that is very important. Find yourself a teacher and find yourself a friend or a small group of friends. I have been a believer in chavura for a very long time, which is to say it's very, very hard to walk into this tradition on your own, alone. You need a support group, you need a friendship group. These days with Zoom, if you can't find a friendship group where you live in Oshkosh or in Prairie Village or wherever, if you're in some place where it's hard to find the kinds of Jews you need to talk to, you can find them somehow on Zoom or Facebook or something like that, but then get together with them as real people as well. Maybe your chavura will be a Friday night dinner group, or maybe it'll be a Tuesday night conversation group, or maybe it'll be an action of doing something for the poor in your community, or raising money for Ukraine or whatever it is. By the way, along with the joint, I recommend Israel. These are young Israelis who go out and help people in needy parts of the world. They're now on the Moldovan border working with Ukrainians. I like that charity very much, Israel. There are ways to create support groups, and then find yourself a teacher. I think a live teacher. Find yourself a Chaim Seidler-Feller. Find yourself somebody who is generous and willing to teach, whom you can learn from, and find something to read. You don't have to devour a huge number of books. As I say, if you jump into Heschel's, the first pages of Heschel's God in Search of Man, you could spend months there. You could spend some time with my books. You could spend some time with texts. and your opinions count. Remember, we are in a postmodern world where you make part of the meaning. So you don't have to say, what does this verse mean? You can say, what does it mean to me? And that's perfectly legitimate. So do it around Torah texts, do it around a good book, find yourself a teacher, and find yourself a circle of friends whom to share it. Those I would say are the important ways in.
Now, before we start taking some questions, there are two more areas I wanted to touch on. One was on the link between spirituality and social justice, and in particular, I know your commitment to environmentalism is profound. So I'd like you to talk about that and how that emerges out of your spiritual worldview, and what we need to be doing about that as well.
Well, I have never believed that there's an opposition between spirituality and social justice. For me, they are two sides of the same thing. There was a group of older rabbis, people you knew too, who are now all left us, people a generation older than myself, who always considered me dangerous. Larry Kushner and I were their enemies. We were dangerous. We were introducing this spiritual agenda into Jewish life, and we would distract people from the reality of social justice. And we always said that was nonsense, that spiritual consciousness means you have to do. We are a tradition of 70 Shema of activism, doing. And so I'm always committed. I'm always committed to a life of doing. I grew up in the anti-Vietnam War era, and I'm a student of Abraham Joshua Heschel. In some ways, I've gone away from Heschel theologically, but I'm very much a student of Heschel's in terms of those two sides of deep thinking and doing going together. Yes, the issue that concerns me is the great issue of our time is the environmental issue, and I'm terrified by there are so many distractions from it, so many things turning us away from it. How can you save the planet if it's going to be too expensive? How can you save the planet if there's a war going on? How can you save the planet if there are crazy people in and out of the White House and in the Kremlin? And you have to deal with all those things. And then what happens to the ecological agenda, the environmental agenda? It simply gets pushed off more and more because there are more urgent things. And they ask voters in polls, what are your top 10 items that you vote about? And the environment comes down to number 8 or number 11. And that's a terribly, terribly dangerous thing. And I think to be a religious human being means to love the world, means to love the natural world, which is God's world. Our way of talking that is creation. We live in a created world. I have taught my Talmidim for the last decade, every morning when you finish davening, even if you don't daven, there are a few people in the world who don't daven, even if you don't, every day we recite the day of creation. On Sunday mornings, we say Bereshit bara Elohim. On Mondays, we say God said that to be a firmament. On Tuesdays, etc., so that we complete the cycle every week and thus remind ourselves that we live in a created world, and the faith in creation is meant to activate us, to convince people of the created world, because a created world you have to have reverence for, you have to have love for. It's a holy thing. God's presence makes it holy. The world is endowed with holiness, and that means you can't destroy it. And that has everything to do with your plastic bags and with the way we overconsume. And I'm one of those overconsumers, and everything else. And so that's a call to us. That's a call to us to do something. And I think, by the way, in terms of bringing the next generation to Judaism, a Judaism that is really concerned with the environment will be a Judaism that speaks to the next generations. And it's a great opportunity for involving people in Jewish life as well, if we were smart enough and had our eyes open.
And I can thank you. I can attest to the fact that I began to practice what you suggested, which is to recite the song of the passage from the creation chapter that pertains to the particular day. And I can tell you by the experience, it's really, it's something I look forward to, because it connects me to something that's real. This is my location in the world. This is my my place. This is my place, the world that was created, and I'm connected to it each day in the process in the unfolding process. So I thank you for that.
And therefore we better take care of it.
Yes, therefore we have to take care of it.
Take care of it. Yes.
Yeah. And I also wanted to say the following: for someone who has this spiritual worldview, you go to Israel every year. Now I know you go to Israel. You love, as you just expressed, you love being there. You write there. You think there. Your books have been translated into Hebrew. In fact, your dissertation, this always struck me, became the Tormented Master, which was an academic book, became a bestseller in Israel when it was published in Hebrew. The Baal HaYisurim, kind of amazing. But how does your religious personality accommodate Jewish nationalism and power? And it's a big question, but an important one, because it's something that I think has split us, especially among young Jews. Is a question that I think really pains them, and they need some guidance.
It's a very big and difficult question, Chaim. I love being here. I love being in Israel. I have many friends here. I have more people to talk to in the city of Jerusalem than I have anyplace else in the world. And if I told you who was in and out of my house in the last couple of days, you would understand that. You know many of the people, and there are conversations you can have in Jerusalem you can't have anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And at the same time, I know that 5 miles away from me, terrible things are being done in the name of the Jewish people, and it has to break my heart. It does. It does. Terrible things are being done in the name of the Jewish people. We are all implicated in crimes that are being committed against innocent civilians because they're being committed in the name of the Jewish people. It's the state of Israel doing them, but the state of Israel calls itself a Jewish state, and the reputation of the Jewish people in the world is on the line. We came out of the Holocaust with an unbelievable amount of moral credit, and Israel is using it up every day, and giving pitron peh. How do you say pitron peh in English? Giving an opening to anti-Semites and to people who think that Jews are only selfish. In terms of the land, I think a lot about Nathan the prophet coming to King David and telling him the parable of the poor man's lamb. Do you have to take the poor man's lamb too? That was a right wife. Take the poor man's lamb too. We have 78% of the land. Do we need the other 22%? Did we have to take it away? We didn't, and we made a terrible mistake. I believe that the settlement project from the beginning, which I've opposed since 1969, has been both a moral and a strategic error and tragedy for the Jewish people. But it has happened. It has happened, and it is successful. And we are guilty. You opened your mouth very loud many times and took great risks, and I've always had tremendous respect for you for doing that. I opened my mouth, but not as much as you, a little bit less perhaps. And I think the Jewish leaders in our generation all bear responsibility of not having spoken up loudly enough and not having demanded that American Jews become active in opposition to what most of us knew was wrong all along. Most of us knew it was wrong all along. But it has now happened, and it has been successful. And we have to live with it because our opposition was not strong enough to carry the day. The people who wanted more land and the people who believed that this was all ours and that God gave it to us and everything else, they carried the day. And we accept that. And so now the question is, where do we go from here? Mm-hmm. I've been active alongside you in trying to create something called an American group supporting the idea of Israel-Palestine Confederation. I don't think two separate states are possible anymore. And one state is either non-democratic or will no longer be a Jewish state. And I really believe in the Jewish state. As I look at Ukrainian Jews coming to immigrate, I say we need a Jewish state that keeps its gates open to Jews. But I think the Palestinians need a place where they can open the gates to Palestinians. And so I think there has to be a confederation, maybe ultimately involving Jordan. If Jordan wants to, that's up to them, obviously. But I think we have to be working toward a confederation where there is a legitimate Palestinian state and there is a legitimate Jewish state, and they learn to live in a kind of codependent and twin situation. And I do this partly because I think it has to happen, and partly, Chaim, for the reason you said, I have to have something to say to young Jews who say, what do you believe in?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And for when Israelis tell me they don't believe in confederation, then I fear they believe really in the status quo, holding on and keep everything and having all the power and hoping somehow the Palestinians will disappear. And that's not a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
I continue to call myself a Zionist. I'm a critical left-wing Zionist, but I'm a Zionist. I like to say I'm a religious Jew and a mostly secular Zionist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a Zionist because of history, because of the Jewish situation and the needs of the Jewish people in the 20th century, not because God gave it to us and therefore we have absolute control. I'm a Zionist for more secular reasons, but I am a Zionist. But on the far left of the Zionist spectrum, and open to seeking solutions. I think we need open people to seeking solutions, and not just saying, well, let's make it a little better. This can never be resolved, so let's patch it over a little bit, and hope it goes away. I don't think that works.
Well, and you're a Zionist who believes that the values of your religious life need to be translated into reality when Jews are present in the land, and you have a universal vision that counters the current mood of tribalism. That's not just Jewish, but we see it all over the world. I mean, that's so important to promote that the spirituality broadens our perception and our capacity to embrace wider circles of people. It really pushes us forward. So
I want to say something else too. I'm not only a Jew, I'm an American. And as an American, I have seen over the last 10 years clear evidence that the original sins that were committed in the creation of a country do not go away. And they connect to haunt a country terribly 200 years later. And America's moral voice is so weakened by everything that has from Trayvon Martin to George Floyd and everything since and everything in between. And the Native American story also, we don't hear it as loudly because more of them died off. Those twin original sins of the creation of the United States have not left. And I say to Israelis, look at America. Look how they're still suffering for not having dealt with it. I think you can just pack away the Palestinian issue and pretend it's not there. It will bite you forever. The way slavery and the genocide of the American Indians continue to bite us forever as Americans, and we should learn from that and share that experience with our Israeli friends.
Okay, so I have a few questions from and please send in some more. We'll finish at 12:30. So one question, it's a big question. What is the place of the Torah?
Yes,
kind of basic.
It's a big question. Well, yeah. Torah, as the Hasidic books always say, Torah means teaching. The word Torah comes from the word moreh, hora'ah.
Mm-hmm.
So they open week after week by saying the Torah is supposed to teach us something. What does it have to teach us in this generation? The text is there. The text is there. We love the text. We read the text. We carry it around. We pick it up, but we reinterpret 70 pieces of the Torah. The Torah is open to endless reinterpretation. I've been writing Divrei Torah now this year and sharing them with friends. And the motto of my Divrei Torah is taken from an old midrash. The old midrash says, you can see it on the top of the page, the old midrash says, Ein lecha parasha uparasha she'ein bat chiyata meitim, ela im she'en lanu koach lidrosh. I translate, there is not a single passage in the Torah that can't be brought back to life if we only had the power to interpret. And that's what we have to do. The text has to be constantly brought back to life. But the text is the text, and I love the text. There are hard passages in that text. I don't easily accept everything in that text, but I know it's there. It's our text, and we reinterpret it in love. We constantly reinterpret it in love.
And how much of that Torah is what do we mean when we say it's the word of God? I think that's part of the question here.
It is our people's response to the divine call that says, know me, be aware, wake up. This is how we do it. We do it through this story. We do it through this reading. We do it through this reinterpretive process. It's our way of responding to that instinctive call within us that says, wake up.
Okay. Another question was, which Heschel book did you mention, which was God in Search of Man? Are there other books by Heschel that you would recommend that people start with, or that's it? Because I usually...
That is for me, that was the transformative one. The first part, the first 100 pages of God in Search of Man. His work is certainly worth reading. His books about social justice, of course. Who is Man is a profound book. Listen, I'm not going to discriminate among Heschel's writings. If you are a scholar, his heavenly Torah min hashamayim, to me, his greatest work. But you really have to be prepared to tackle that one. That's not the place to start.
And you learned that with him, if I'm not mistaken. Torah min hashamayim. Yeah. Someone else asks, can we live without divine hierarchy? Without hierarchy?
We have to. It's not easy. I would say community should replace hierarchy. Again, I'm a chavurah person. I believe in intimate community. And that intimate community should be part of a network of intimate communities. And that network should be part of a broader network. I believe in concentric circles of intimate community, expanding circles of intimate community to replace hierarchy. My neo-Hasidic model does not have a Rebbe. I don't want to be the Rebbe of the neo-Hasidic world. I want to be a teacher, and I want to have companions with whom I share it. Some of my closest friends in the world are still my friends from Chavurat Shalom in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And that experience of Chavurah transformed my life, and it's my answer to hierarchy. I like to say, for my feminist friends, I like to say the Torah that comes out of Miriam's well, coming out of the depths, is easier for us today than the Torah that comes down from Moses' mountain on high, and that means with less hierarchy. And the fact that women are involved equally with men is in itself an anti-hierarchical move, and that's a very positive and important development in the Judaism of our time.
Wow, very important. I thought that perhaps since we're anticipating next week the celebration of Purim, maybe, and you do touch on Purim in your book, maybe you share something with us about Purim. You also relate Purim to Yom Kippurim, which is a classic teaching that I think is really important for people to hear and to reflect on. So take it away on Purim.
Okay, well, first I'll just say something more profound, and then I'll say something light for Purim. I just completed writing a book about Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, one of my favorite Hasidic masters. Levi Yitzchak published only one book in his lifetime, and that was the book about Hanukkah and Purim. It's a very unusual thing for somebody to do. There's nobody who just wrote about Hanukkah and Purim. They're not considered very important holidays. Levi Yitzchak was the rabbi of a major town. He should have published some novella and some Talmudic tractate or some book of responsa. Instead, he published a little book on Hanukkah and Purim. Why? He felt the most important thing to understand was the hidden miracle. We live in a time when there are no miracles. Look around. He said, who performs miracles? There are no miracles. We have all these stories in the Torah about miracles, but there are no miracles today. Therefore, the book we need is the book of Esther, because it's a book in which there are no miracles. God doesn't seem to be there at all. Everything seems to just happen. And yet behind the surface, if you look deeper, you find a miracle. There's a hidden miracle behind what seems to be just the natural occurrence of things. And that's what we need, he says. We live in a time of only hidden miracles, and we need to look deeper and look for them, find them. So there's a miracle of getting up in the morning. Tomorrow morning, when you get up, remember, it's a miracle to get up in the morning. That's a hidden miracle. But as you say, Purim is also Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippur in the Torah is always referred to in the plural. The Torah never says Yom Kippur. It always says Yom Kippurim. Why? The Hasidim like to say, because it's a day like Purim, Kippurim. Why is Yom Kippur like Purim? Because on Purim, we get so drunk we can't tell the difference between good and evil, between Mordechai and Haman. And on Yom Kippur, God is supposed to get so drunk on the prayers of Israel that he can't tell the difference between tzaddikim and sinners, and therefore has to forgive everybody. So that means transcending all those narrow lines when we are so sure of what's permitted and what's forbidden. Maybe Purim and Yom Kippurim is a time to transcend and go back to a more inner place before all those lines were drawn. So I wish you a good Purim, and don't drive if you're drinking or otherwise intoxicated, and have a good time, and try to rush through those last couple of chapters of the Megillah.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, you can't cover it up. What do you do with the violence? I mean, I was thinking that the teaching about Yom Kippurim reverts back to Purim in the same way that God has to learn to forgive us. So we have to learn. Did we lose you, Art? Did we lose him, Giselle? We lost him. Yeah, what happened? All right. Well, all right. I'm sorry that we lost him. My friends. Maybe he'll come back.
Maybe he'll come back.
Yeah. But I mean, what I was proposing to say was that if we take his teaching seriously, and that on Yom Kippur, there's a sense that we need to be forgiven. So maybe this notion that we can no longer tell the difference between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordecai means that we have to begin to look at the other person in a very different way, and that whether it's a matter of forgiveness or a matter of opening up to the other, that might be the more profound lesson of Purim, rather than sustaining a sense of enmity. Well, we basically come to a close, and I do want to say the following: that our teaches a class weekly. It will start in April. You can find the details of that class on the website of the Hebrew College, and we didn't get a chance to talk about that. At the Hebrew College, Art founded a new rabbinical program. To my mind, it's the most successful rabbinical program today. In fact, I think it's the only one where the numbers are increasing now, and it's very different from other rabbinic programs. And you find the character and the sort of the spiritual focus of the students in the program at the Hebrew College to be distinctive. So take a look at the website, and you'll have a chance to study with him. He's teaching his book, the book on Chernobyl, weekly during the spring semester, starting in April. We will also continue with our series in April and in May. I'll teach a class on Passover on April 11th, I think. I'll have to check. And on May 24th, we'll continue with a session, an interview with Daniel Sokach, whose book, Can We Talk About Israel? A Guide for the Curious, Confused, and Conflicted will be the subject of our discussion. And somewhere along the way, I hope that Deborah Lipstadt will be participate in our program. And that's something that I think all of us can have a role in pushing forward, because there's a particular senator who's blocking the discussion of her appointment and preventing her from assuming her position in the government, which it seems to me is more important than ever at this moment. And those of you who are concerned, take a look and do your thing. And don't forget, please don't forget about Hillel. We need your assistance, support to continue the broad programming that we have done during the pandemic and will continue to do, obviously, with the students as they return to in-person classes. And don't forget about our need to offer support to the aid organizations that are working on the ground in Ukraine. And as Art mentioned, the Israelis who are on the border, and are actually, putting their lives on the line to help out the Ukrainians. Thank you very much for participating. Take care, and we'll see you again, hopefully before Passover. Shalom, shalom. And thank you, Giselle, for making this possible. All right, we can open up the people who want to say something. We can open up the